Good evening, Cedar Falls, and welcome to tonight's committee meeting. We will begin tonight's meeting with a roll call from Madam Clerk.
Schultz.
Here.
DeBoer. Cruz.
Here.
Harding. Ganfield.
Here.
Sires.
Here.
Dunn.
Here.
Councilmember DeBoer absent.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Tonight's agenda is for the Finance and Business Operations Committee, and we will begin tonight's meeting with a presentation from Director Rodenbeck with an update to the fiscal year 2024 budget.
Thank you. So really just kind of want to leave off maybe a little right after our last presentation. So last presentation talked a lot about some state legislation going on. So Senate File 181, or formerly SSB 1056, was signed by the governor on February 20th. So the Department of Revenue performed the recalculation of the residential rollback. Everyone may recall last time we were kind of at a little bit of a standstill because we were waiting on those final numbers. And then Blackhawk County recalculated it based on the rollback going down to the 54.65. And so we received those new calculations from the county on February 24th. And I do want to just do a little shout out to Blackhawk County. They were awesome and really working hard to try to get us the numbers right away. So really appreciate Tim putting some extra hours in to do that. So then we were able to kind of now start and redo our budget calculations and can proceed ahead with the process. So that's kind of where we are for tonight. So again, changing that rollback was about an estimated loss of $430,000 to our general fund. Again, by reducing that residential rollback, it naturally shifts that burden to commercial and industrial properties because it's lowering the burden on the residential properties. And for this year only, the legislation did pass that we have an extended deadline to April 30th, but it is just for this year only. So we'll be back to our normal March deadline next year. So again, now that we can proceed ahead, I'm not going to repeat a lot of things from last time, just a little bit of an overview. But again, we always talk about for a person who wants to know what makes up their property tax bill. It's going to be the valuation and the rollback and the tax rate are the factors that go into determining how much taxes you're going to pay for the city. And of course, what you all have control over is the tax rate. County controls the valuations, state controls the rollback number, you guys control the tax rate. So just a reminder, we talked about last time in terms of valuation, there was no countywide revaluation because it's an even year, not an odd year. So if you had a $100,000 home, your house is still assessed at $100,000. I mentioned last time that assessed valuations in Cedar Falls increased by 2% or $76 million. And again, last year we would have seen a higher increase in assessed valuations because of that reassessment in the odd years. So in terms of rollback, so again, kind of chart changed a little bit from last time because now that rollback factor for residential is 54.65. We talked, I think, a little bit last time. Multi-residential is now the same as residential. So they have had that phase in, and they are now at the residential rate. And commercial industrial remained at 90%. This showed this chart last time, too. For Cedar Falls, we're always interested in that residential rollback because, again, we are very high valued at residential. So for FY24, 78% residential. I know last time Council Member Ganfield had a question about how do we maybe compare to other cities. So thought I might just put it right in the presentation to see that. So if you take the top 20 cities in Iowa, we had to base it on last year's values. We didn't have everyone's values for this year. So you can see in the top 20 cities in Iowa, we're really about the fourth highest in terms of our breakout of residential compared to commercial industrial. We thought it might also be interesting to look back 10 years and see if that's changed significantly for whether for us or other cities. So again, you can see some cities like West Des Moines, they're kind of more at that 60-40 kind of split, where we're more at that 75, 76, and even growing to 78. Some of those towns probably don't surprise us that have high residential in terms of Ankeny, Johnston, Urbandale, kind of in that metro area. So tax rate. So again, last time we really couldn't get to this part of the presentation. This is what we were on hold for, so here we are tonight. So year we're in right now, fiscal year 23, our tax rate is 1151. What's in our proposed budget right now is $11.74, and so that's an increase of 23 cents. Just want to let everyone know what that includes right now is including things that were talked about at goal setting, including the capital projects out of the FY24 column in the CIP, and so that's where we're at, 1174. Now, always keep in mind, we can always go down. This is just the top end. So this is just a history of where that tax rate has been over the last 7-8 years. So again, the increase from 1151 to 1174, what we have proposed. I think Councilperson Dunn might have brought this up before about how do we compare in terms of other large cities and reminding kind of where we're at. So, and I think we've talked about employees per capita, we've talked about our tax rate per capita. So if you look at this chart, you can see that we're the 7th lowest of the top 20, and that's just the rate. And this is, of course, using last year because people haven't set their rate for this year. So we're 1151, 7th lowest, but if you take that and you do it on a per capita basis, we're actually the 4th lowest. Still, the people ahead of us, Dubuque, Ames, the ones we kind of expect. But this is just, if you just take the rate itself, not factor that in, we are one of the lowest rates of the top 20 cities in Iowa. So again, what staff came tonight, prepared and proposing in the budget is an 1174 rate. You can see how that works on the various classes of property. As we always talk about, we like to tell the whole story. We don't want to just say tax rate's going from 1151 to 1174, and what does that mean? We like to tell people exactly what that means. So this is a chart that's probably very familiar with all of you because we tend to talk about it a lot. So right now, if the 1174 rate would stay through the whole process, you can see that's just about a 3% increase on a residential home. Or if you take a $100,000 home, that's $18.50. Now, again, people will say, why do you always use 100,000 when maybe not a lot of homes in Cedar Falls valued at 100,000, but it makes it for easy math. If you have a $300,000 home, $400,000 home, you can just take the $18.55 and multiply it by 3, 4, whatever your value is. So it kind of makes the math easy. And then you'll see for commercial industrial, they would be at the 2% because their rollback factor stayed the same. So the only thing changing for commercial industrial would be the rate difference. And then, of course, the multi-residential, you'll see the large decrease because of them having such a significant decrease in their rollback factor, that they're going from 63.75 down to 54.65. So where we're at tonight, and you'll see on the council agenda for tonight, is to set the date for the public hearing. So again, we're not, approving this tonight. This is just proposed. So this is the max levy. We can always go down. Now, the one thing that you've heard us probably talk about before, kind of from a staff and probably even from your perspective, how the state did the max levy is a little difficult because we talk and we stand here and talk about $11.74 rate, but you'll see the max levy says $10.81 because it's not all the levies. They only pick certain levies to be on the maximum levy resolution. So it's always kind of one more piece you have to try to explain, is that we sit here and talk about 1174, but the levies, the resolution's really going to say 1081. Just thought that, so you can see there I circled it, so that is a 0.73% increase. So small increase over the current year. Just for everyone's benefit, thought you'd like to know that last year, when we were at the same part in the process, we set a max levy rate for $10.92. So you can see this is at $10.81. And the total levy for the current year was $11.67. So again, there's always that little disparity in terms of what does this resolution say and what's the actual rate we're talking about. again, max levy. We can always go down. You'll probably hear me say that multiple times. Obviously, one of the big factors last time too that we were waiting on, one was the recalculation by the state, two was about the EMA and where we're at with that levy. So, as all of you know, the levy continues to stay under the cities, counties, the entities to tax that. It's not going to a countywide levy for FY24. But you can see that our costs for Cedar Falls that we'll have to levy for increased from $576,590 to just about $1.1 million. So an increase of about $527,000. Formula went from calls of service and population, that 80-20 split, to just completely based on valuation. That's why there's such a significant increase. So, you know, as we all know and understand, so Cedar Falls residents are really going to be bearing that cost of the EMA cost increases. So, again, just another challenge that was part of the budget this year was how do we factor in, you know, a levy that went almost doubled. Other challenges we see moving forward is on the revenue side. Talked a little bit about these last time too. We know the backfill is continuing to be phased out, so just about $74,000 each year we'll continue to lose from the backfill. I'm not sure if the state will continue to fund the new business tax credit. Right now they are. We'll see how that continues to go over the years. There's other state legislation regarding property tax reform, including capping tax levy increases, so that could be a challenge that we'll have to work with. I think some of the concerns right now with some of those proposals is really taking those local voted levies, library band levy, and including that, and that could be a challenge then for us if that gets rolled into our main levy. Same challenges we talked about last time on the expense side. We know we're continuing to, you know, have costs that relates to health insurance, personnel, inflation costs, construction costs. So we know those are all things moving ahead that will be challenges. Things that, you know, we like to think that we have some tools left is, again, we're continuing to save up for capital projects, continue to save a portion of the TIF release for future economic development. Right now, we would have the 27-cent emergency levy available, which would generate about $558,000. However, again, this would be one of those under the property tax reform that really could go away and just be part of the overall general levy. So, not sure what the status of that is. So, again, tonight, it was really just to come presentation, get out to all of you what's the prepared budget and proposed budget. What we'd look for tonight, again, is to set that date for the public hearing. We'll have to publish, though, our max levy to meet our publication requirements. On March 20th, we would hope to hold the hearing then for the maximum levy dollars. And then on March 20, also then set the hearing. Assuming that passes, then we would set the hearing date for the actual approval of the budget. We'd have to publish the budget, that notice for that one, and then have a public hearing on April 3rd on the actual budget. Now, again, that kind of leaves us a little bit of wiggle room before the April 30th. We always like to, you know, just give us another meeting in case some things come up or there's, you know, people want to do a meeting instead of a special meeting or something to talk about things. Kind of gives us that little buffer in there. So really tonight, presentation, what we'd like to see is a motion to recommend to council to set the public hearing for the maximum levy for March 20th and include in that the maximum levy dollars for $22,370,390 for the applicable levies and the maximum levy rate of $10.81 for the applicable levies. Again, total rate's $11.74, but this is only $10.81. If anyone's interested, this maximum levy amount, the 22 million number, is actually about 200,000 less than what you set the maximum levy for last year. So sometimes it's good to know kind of where we're at in comparison to the year before. Again, I just want to read, so that's would be the motion I guess we're looking for, to recommend that for council tonight. And obviously you can take questions.
All right, thank you, Director Rodenbeck. Any council questions for staff? Yes, Councilman Schultz.
Well, I'd like to start right away with the EMA levy.
Okay.
And just point out again, as well as Andy wrote the article, this is something that, we're looking at other things, but our hands are quite tied on this. Could we just abandon the relationship and go in with you and I? From the research is that our equipment doesn't match, and it wouldn't be something we could do. Could we have some recourse with the state? There isn't any recourse there. So is this going to balance out in another year? That's our hope. But I know you gave a shout out to the county, but the county as a whole kind of put a mark on Cedar Falls on this, and it's a tough one to swallow. And there isn't anybody up here that I've talked to, or anybody I've talked to at the state or in the city that is a way out of this. So I appreciate the work you're doing to keep our budget still in line with this. So
Yeah, it's a challenge for sure. Like I said, we're kind of in a difficult spot right now. And then also not knowing in a future year whether they would change it to a countywide levy, and Cedar Falls residents would still have to participate. So kind of hard sometimes for us to talk about what our options are when we don't even know what another year will bring in terms of changing how that levy might work.
Can I take one thing there? And I don't mean to. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, if someone knows better, but and I maybe didn't understand, but I don't want to put faults. The county board of supervisors in that vote, I believe, had even though there's several people on that board, they had one vote. I just want to make sure we're not putting incorrect information out there. It was a meeting between the mayors of our county and the board of supervisors, but the board of supervisors had one vote. So
the county.
That's how
the
Not
county
I
board
didn't
of
say the county
supervisors.
supervisors.
Sure.
It was the other cities.
Okay,
in our county.
I'm not understanding, so I'm sure somebody else isn't understanding. So I just want to make sure we're not throwing somebody under the bus. All right, any other council comments? Yes, Councilman Harding.
Just to that point, I had a question. If we know where the state's at on voting, because they were talking about, conversations I've had, the state was talking about possibly shifting that EMA levy to be assessed by the county instead of assessed by each city. So do we know, are they going to be voting on that this year? We don't have any more information on it, or?
I don't, because my understanding is I think that passed the funnel that happened last Friday. I thought that was my last understanding of that
That's my
passed.
understanding as
Yeah.
well, but we don't know how far that'll
Right.
go or won't go.
Right.
Okay. So just to people I've talked to who said we could join in with you and I or do that, that's another challenge. Like you had mentioned, that if we do that and the state passes that, well, then we have to
Cedar
to
Falls
pay for
residents are
both.
paying
We're
twice.
still there. So,
Right.
yeah, now,
Yeah,
we're,
so
now we're
it
paying
ends up
twice.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. So it is a tough
It is a tough
position.
spot.
But yeah, I echo Councilmember Schultz's statements. Thanks for keeping it as low as possible with having those two big things to go to bat.
Yes, Councilman Ganfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just had a couple of questions for my understanding. I know we can digress on this other topic of the EMA levy and the cost that's going to bring to us. And again, echo our thanks that you're willing to work through that difficulty. I just wanted to ask a couple points of clarity, if you wouldn't mind, Mrs.
Sure.
Rodenbeck. Last year, the max levy rate was set at 1092. What did it end at after our deliberations on the budget? I know you said it, and I just didn't get it right.
So the max levy was set at $10.92. It ended up being $10.76.
Gotcha. Okay.
So again, the total levy went from $11.67 down to $11.51.
Gotcha.
So again, that's why I just,
There's
for
movement.
us,
Yeah, we can come down.
we can
just
come down, we can't go up.
increase from that 10.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I just wanted to double check the 27-cent emergency levy. Are we currently utilizing that?
We are not.
Okay, but that is an option.
It is an option
Need
we could
be.
use. Yep. Now, it would
that is
increase
just
property
additional
taxes.
property tax.
Right. But it's one of those, if we got ourselves to a point that we have no more room in our $8.10, we fully maximized our debt service, trust and agency, all of those other things, it is one piece we would still currently have available, but we have not used it. Haven't used it for several years.
Okay, just want to make sure it wasn't outside that
Yeah.
max levy. I appreciate the clarifications.
Yeah.
Any other council? Yes, Councilman Cruz.
Thank you. Going to the EMA levy again, with legislative items, Commerce and Ways and Means is not subject to the funnel. I would certainly think this would be in one of those two categories.
Sure, because I know like the property tax reform has been referred now, my understanding is to the Ways and Means Committee also. That's my understanding where that one's at. I'm not sure about the EMA where it was,
I
if
mean,
it was
that's
referred
the
to
point
them
I
or
want
not.
to just mention that's
Yeah.
worth. Then I look at this and I think of the cost of this service is by the people that use it.
Mhm.
So it's like an enterprise fund.
Yeah.
Who uses it pays for it. So the vote can change each year
Mhm.
on how it's
Correct.
divvied up.
Right, because we've had it be 90-10. I think last year or the year before it went to 80-20. In other words, calls, when I say 80-20, 80% on calls of service, 20% on population. Or do I have that backwards? Right, 80%, yeah. And so it was 90-10, went to 80-20. So again, we had to pick up more than that year. And now again, in one vote, it changes to valuation
So
based.
this isn't set in stone forever and ever, by
No.
any means. So we're looking at an increase of 527,000. That can buy a lot of equipment for us to coordinate with you and I, or have our own, or have some other option here available. Correct?
Correct. I think the concern is, like we keep talking about, is our concern is we could choose to do that, but what if in a year it goes to a countywide levy? Now Cedar Falls residents are stuck. Now we've committed ourselves to another option, and if it's a countywide levy, they still have to pay for the countywide levy.
Well, it's a fluid situation. It's not set in stone, is what I'm kind of getting at.
Correct. We don't know what the formula could be. We don't know if there will be state legislation. We don't know if next year they'll vote to have it be a countywide levy. You're absolutely right.
Okay, another question, if I may.
Yes.
The numbers here do not reflect the school bond issue kicking in later in the year, if I understand correctly.
Correct. These are just the city's tax rate, just city
So
tax rate.
for
So
the
obviously people have
citizens-
county and.
The citizens
okay.
are going to see more of an increase than just what's laid out here.
Correct. Yep, just
Okay.
the city. Yep.
So with that in mind, I'd be in favor of keeping the max levy at the 1174.
So I believe tonight we're just setting the hearing, right?
And I'm throwing out components that I want staff to come forward
Oh,
with
sure.
on
Okay.
ways to reduce this, to be talked about,
Okay.
and not then say, next hearing, Ms. Rodebeck, I want a reduction.
Yeah.
I want a reduction known that this is not
Okay.
acceptable in my mind to have
Sure.
an increase. I want a net zero.
Okay.
I think there's other people that share my,
And when you say that, you mean the actual effect, not the rate going down to 1151? Because if the rate stayed the same, residential property owners would still see about a 1% increase because
I'd like to see a zero increase.
for that net effect to residential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would as well. Not to jump in there
Well,
without.
this is my concern, though, is we're going to be digging into this more after we set the hearing. Well, this is to set the hearing. So obviously, we're going to be pouring through the budget. That's why I'm trying to stay on, I understand what you're saying. I'm not trying to take away from that. There'll be conversation, I'm sure, that we'll have at the next meeting, but right now, we're trying to get to the setting the hearing is what I'm getting at.
Sure. Yep. Nope, I understand that. Okay. I just wanted to make sure when he said zero, what it was, if it's
Right.
the rate or the net effect.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
Any other council questions, concerns? Okay. And because this is simply setting the hearing date, I'm not entertaining public comment tonight because we will have time for that. We'll make time for that at the actual budget conversation. So for now, if there's not any other council questions, concerns, yes, Councilman Harding?
Could you back the screen up to what the recommended motion was?
Denny probably can.
So if we make a motion for that, you can still come back with options to
Yep,
lower it
absolutely.
as well, so that
We just-
we're just
we
setting
just
it at the
can
max?
increase.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, well then I would make a motion to set the maximum levy rate at 1081, and although the total rate is 1174, and with bearing
Right.
in mind what other council members have said.
Yep.
Second.
Okay, and on March, okay, we got a motion and a second for the hearing on March 20th of 2023 to discuss the hearing for the maximum levy rate. Any other questions or concerns from council?
Quick
Yes.
question. So I'm assuming that we'll have another committee meeting next time with
Correct.
where we talk about
Yep.
what's possible.
Right, because
Okay.
obviously at the next meeting, you can then set that maximum levy,
Yeah.
just like Councilperson Gamfield asked before. What did we publish it at? What did we get to?
Okay.
You know, we can do that at the next meeting. The hard part is that we got to publish,
Yeah, I
you
got
know,
you.
something beforehand.
Okay.
So.
That was
yeah.
it. All right.
Any other questions or concerns from council? And I believe we can just do a voice vote for this. So all in favor of setting the public hearing date, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. All right. Thank you, Director Rodenbeck.
Thank you.
So next up on the agenda, we have a presentation from Shane Graham about economic development incentives.
All right, thank you. I apologize, some of these slides may look familiar. If council remembers, I gave a somewhat similar presentation back in November. There's a few more changes in here, so I will go over that. There was one change, there was one slide that I added after the council packet went out at the end of this slide, so if you're following on your computer, you'll see one additional slide here that was added after that. So again, I just want to go over real quick where our urban renewal or TIF districts are in Cedar Falls. We have a number of them. The first one is in our downtown area. Again, this was established in 1986 and covers basically the area from the river west to Franklin Street and then First Street down to approximately 7th Street. We do have an urban renewal area in our College Hill area from Olive Street to Campus Street, and then approximately 20th Street down to 23rd Street. This was established in 2011. Pinnacle Prairie, this is in our Pinnacle Prairie area. This was established in 2006 and goes from approximately Green Hill Road down to Viking Road at the south end. South Cedar Falls Urban Renewal Area, this was established in 2018, and this is at the south end along Highway 20, up along the Ridgeway Avenue corridor up to Technology Parkway. And then our largest urban renewal area is our Unified Highway 58 area, and this is comprised of our industrial park along the south side of town. There's multiple establishment dates of this TIF district. And then this also goes up along Highway 58 to include our northern Cedar Falls Industrial Park. So I want to go over, based on the referral, over what our current incentives are. In our downtown area, the city provides a 5-year 100% tax rebate at our TIF rate of $30.39 on the increased valuation of a project with a minimum investment of $200,000. In those agreements, we do not have any minimum job creation or retention requirements. However, we do include wording that that 2 full-time equivalent jobs be created or retained. And we include this job requirement in our downtown, and you'll see on our next slide in our College Hill areas, typically because the dollar investment is a little bit lower as compared to some of our larger industrial park projects. And currently, the city does not own any vacant development land within the downtown area, so we do not offer any sort of land incentives in this area. So in our College Hill area, very similar to downtown, again, the same structure with a 5-year 100% tax rebate with the $200,000 minimum investment. Same thing with the job requirements. There's no minimum requirement, but we do have the 2 full-time equivalent jobs in those agreements. And again, the city does not own any vacant development land within the College Hill area, so we do not offer any land incentives. So getting into our industrial parks, for industrial projects located in our industrial park, the city provides approximately 1 acre of developed industrial park land for every 10,000 square feet of building area. We typically have a minimum valuation of at least $40 per square foot. And if the valuation of the building is $1.2 million or above, the city then provides for a 5-year partial property tax abatement. And you can see there it starts at a 75% abatement in year 1 and goes down by 15% over the first 5 years. So then in year 6, it's paying its full taxes. If the building valuation is between $1 million and $1.2 million, the city can then provide for a 3-year partial property tax abatement at 45% each year. And if the building valuation is less than $1 million, no tax incentives are provided at all. So for industrial projects, again, typically the land is donated at no cost for industrial, manufacturing, warehouse type use. For any commercial or non-commercial projects, the city can sell land for the project instead of donating it. An example in our industrial park would be there's 2 facilities out there, the CrossFit Kilo facility, and there's a gymnastics facility located on Venture Way, kind of at the west end of the industrial park. Those lots were sold for fair market value price, and there's no tax incentives and no other incentives involved. That was just a straight cash sale. And in our industrial parks, we do not have any job creation or retention requirements for industrial projects, just that minimum valuation requirement, and that the typical, if there were to be any job requirements for those industrial type projects, those are generally handled through the high quality jobs program, through the state, through IEDA. If they want any sort of incentives for creating or retaining jobs, they usually will submit an application and go before the IEDA board, and they'll get their incentives that way. So from the city's point, we just use the valuation requirement, which then guarantees that the city is getting repaid in tax payments over the year of the lifespan of the agreement. So for professional offices that are located in our technology park, the city provides approximately 1 acre of developed land for every 7,500 square feet of building area, with a minimum building valuation of $75 per square foot. And similar to our industrial park projects, if a building valuation is $1.2 million or above, the city can provide for a 5-year tax rebate on that same sliding scale. If it's between $1 and $1.2 million, that rebate would be 45% over 3 years. And if there's any building valuation less than $1 million, then there's no tax incentives provided. So for our professional office projects that are located in our technology park, typically, again, land is donated at no cost for a corporate office or professional office type use. For any non-corporate or professional office projects, the city may sell the land again for a project instead of donating it. As of right now, we do not have any current examples where we've actually sold land in our technology park for any commercial type projects. And again, in the technology park, we do not have any job creation or retention requirements, just the minimum valuation requirement. So looking at how we value our land in our industrial park, the city values its existing industrial park property at $1.50 a square foot, or $65,340 per acre. This value has been previously determined by reviewing the cost for land acquisition as well as the cost for development, such as installing roads and all the infrastructure. And I will point out that in our 200-acre industrial park expansion area that we recently purchased and is currently being developed, we did analyze the cost of that, of what we paid to acquire it, and where we're at right now is what contracts we have for the preparation of that land. And we feel that that price per square foot has gone up to approximately $80,000 per acre, or $1.84 per square foot. Again, that's not the final value. We did get some estimates from our engineering department on what it would cost for. There's still some roads that we would have to extend and some additional utilities, but that's the general estimate. And this number also does include, if council might remember, we had to pay to get some water rights for that. So we did include the payment for that into the factor of what this valuation would be. So types of industrial park businesses. So the industrial and technology park has approximately 160 businesses and 7,000 employees. And this is the overall industrial park, looking basically from Highway 58 all the way west of Target into our West Viking Road Industrial Park. Businesses include manufacturing, distribution, and logistics. We have truck trailer repair and service, et cetera. And then within this area, we also have other complementary uses located in and around the park, including convenience stores, eating establishments, storage facilities, hotels, et cetera. So when looking to attract businesses in this area, we would like to see the similar industrial type uses, you know. We really try to market on our location, so distribution, manufacturing. We have a good base of manufacturing. We would really love to see more of those types of industries, as well as other industries and other businesses that complement these businesses. I've heard in my time here that we need more eating establishments, or it would be nice to get a place to grab a coffee in the morning before I head to work. So, so we do see those as complementary uses that are nice to have within that area that serves the employees and the businesses in that area. And I would just make a note that the city has turned down projects before that may not have been a good fit for this area. We do get projects that come from Gross Cedar Valley and the state, and we've turned those down, whether it's a business that has a lot of odor, or it's got a lot of noise, or they got a lot of wastewater effluent that's just too much kind of for us to handle. So we do analyze the fit as well when we review some of these proposals that come in. So. And then again, in our industrial park is zoned industrially, and because of our zoning regulations, many of these uses are only allowed within the industrial park area. When you look at things like some of our major manufacturing and even warehousing and distribution, those are only allowed in our industrial park districts. So those would be confined to basically our industrial parks and no other locations. So that's all I have. If there's any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Any council questions or concerns or any of that? Yes, Councilman Ganfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Graham, I just wanted to double check a couple of things. On the existing industrial park, or the previous industrial park, we're valuing that at $1.50 a square foot. Is there any appreciation for that park, the new one being $1.84 per square foot? Is that what it was when we developed the land at $1.50 a square foot? Or is that current rate?
That's the number we use now, and I mean that's the number that's been used probably since we've developed that. That's been developed probably over the last 15 to 20 years. Again, that's kind of looking at back then what we paid for the land, what it costed to extend the roads and the infrastructure. So there hasn't been an appreciation. I think we've used that number, that $1.50, for some time now.
That has been static. Okay, gotcha. I wanted to clarify that. I appreciate that. Also, I just wanted to know logistics, the last two slides. Can we make sure we update those on the city packet download site later?
Yes.
So we'll get those accurate. Perfect, thanks.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilman Sires.
Shane, I have a question. How much property tax is being brought into the county with our industrial park? Is it all going straight back into the investment of the streets and buying of the land, et cetera?
I can try to answer this. I might have to look Jennifer's way for a little help. Since this isn't an urban renewal area, we get to capture the taxes from the county and the school. There's a certain portion that we cannot collect from the school physical plant and equipment levy and the city debt service levy. But otherwise, if it's in the TIF district, we can collect that, and then that goes back to repaying our infrastructure costs, our costs for the land, things like that.
Right, that's what I was wondering. When are we going to end this so we can have some tax relief for our taxpayers?
As I mentioned earlier in the slide, there's expiration dates on these. If they're economic development TIFs, they have a 20-year lifespan. If you notice, in our industrial park back in 2016, the area where the Target Distribution Center expanded, it ended its lifespan, and I believe that's where that money is that we divert to the Economic Development Fund, which then we use to pay up front for projects.
So that's still not going back to the county as a way of property taxes?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I take that back. So the city portion we divert to that economic development fund. But yeah, the school district and the county are now seeing their full release after that district expired.
So we're still not getting any benefits from the industrial park as far as money coming in that we don't have to come up with, as opposed to taxing people for their properties?
I guess I'm not quite sure what.
Well, when you invest in a property, you like to have it pay back. So I'm wondering when the citizens are going to get some payback on the industrial park, that's all.
So maybe I can try to answer that, Mr. Sires. I think what Shane's saying is as the industrial park's 20-year expiration happens, that money does flow back to the city, does flow back to the county, does flow back to the school district. So as Shane said, in, gosh, what, I forget the year, but we also have another one that's coming up in 2024? 24 that'll be expiring, that those dollars will then flow back to those entities as well.
No, but that was my question. When the 20-year on target runs out,
When that-
instead of paying that forward into more investment in the industrial park, I'd like to see that come back to Cedar Falls so we can use it for $30 million on the street or whatever we need to use it for.
and that's where it does. It flows back to the city.
But it
flows-
hasn't yet, was my only point.
Yes, it has.
And how much has flowed back? How much comes back every year from the industrial park?
Oh, I want to say, Jen,
1.3 million for the city, probably a comparable amount.
And the
for
same amount
schools.
goes to the county as well?
that's a rule of thumb, a third, a third, a third, but it's slightly different than that, but very close.
So what's our total that's coming back from the industrial park? Just the southern one, you don't have to, I'm just curious, because I drive through there every day just about.
So right now, for our Southern Industrial Park, the TIF increment is about 3.4 million.
So
I
we
think
get
what
that
you're
for the
asking
city.
is- But that's,
Or do we only get a third of that?
but some of that is.
I think
like
he's
an-
asking what's expired.
Oh,
coming
okay.
back.
Right, that's what I was asking.
The 1.3 million,
Okay,
right, yeah.
thank you.
Annually.
Yes, Councilman Cruz?
Thank you. To expand upon Council Sires, I've heard different people say that after the TIF expires, it's diverted back into economic development, or are you saying during those 20 years, that portion's diverted into economic development fund to further expand?
So the council's policy currently that they can change is that it's set aside for the economic development. Expired TIF dollars go into and can be used for really whatever the council chooses, but that's
But
That's-
currently, it's getting earmarked for development.
it is coming into
Okay.
the city and sits there in economic development, correct?
Okay. So a couple other questions then, if I may. When this first was brought up 6 months ago or so, we had this presentation and it talks about the increased valuation. I brought up the fact that we should look at the value before buildings are tore down on these properties, because you're resetting the cost basis down to a lower value and then you're tiffing more. And you had said that that doesn't happen very often, but I think it does happen more than we realize. I think we need to look at the increased valuation from what it was prior to anything was tore down, if that makes sense.
I guess I'm not quite following you. So you were looking at the valuation for,
So your downtown TIF and College Hill TIF both say increased valuation of the project with a minimum investment of $200,000. So if you have a property that has a rundown building, whatever it is, it's earmarked for a TIF project. The building is tore down. You wait till after January 1st for the new tax valuation, which is now lowered because there's no building on it, and then you TIF it from there. You've increased the TIF, but then you've taken away that older buildings property tax flow going out to the entities. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Okay, I think that's
Daryl,
artificially-
do you have an example of that? I'm trying to wrap my head around when that happened, for example, downtown.
Well, there, I could give you probably 2 or 3 different ones.
How about one?
The old Baptist church. Now it's not on the tax rolls because it's a nonprofit, but if that was a building that was for profit, the purchaser, the valuation of whatever that was would be off the tax rolls. You lower the value down to just the dirt value, when before it had a building on it.
Correct.
So
And we
you're-
can't always,
If you're saying, I don't want to use the word exploiting, but it's kind of exploiting it a little bit.
right, I see where you're coming from, but if a developer or a property owner wants to demolish their building, we can't tell them.
I'm
they
not
can't.
saying that. I'm saying that the value that you're using the increased number on, increased valuation, let's say there's a $500,000 old building there, and their new project's going to be 10 million. You're wiping out the building to go back down to the dirt value, and you're increasing what's going to be TIFed. It seems like a little bit of an exploitation of the TIF program, because your increased value should be based on the 500,000 building and the dirt, not go down just to dirt value.
But when the developer comes in and says, hey, I want to tear this down,
Right?
and they tear that down, it's the county that then sets that comes through and says, okay, the now value of that property is X. It may have been Y, and in your example, an old dilapidated building may have had some taxable value, but they've wiped that out.
Mhm. That seems to be the standard. And I think that exploits the TIF program. Not a lot necessarily, but it does.
Because it's all based on property taxes that the developer pays into the
Right.
future.
Right.
So that refund would really be on property taxes paid.
I understand. But I'm just saying that the valuation should go back to the point where there's a building on there. And the increase in that's eligible for the TIF would be the county's property tax valuation with the building and the dirt. If I need to make a motion for that effect, or this is just a discussion right now, but it does make a difference over time.
Yeah, I think it gets complicated because then how far back do you go? If I tear the building down today,
Well-
or what if the example you used with the church that was just torn down?
Mhm.
So, is it 5 years? Is it 2 years? Is it 10 years? That gets very difficult.
Well, you set something so that you include some buildings. I mean, to me, it's clearly if you want to call it a loophole of some sort. It expands what's the amount of the TIF. The other thing I'd like to bring up, the downtown and the College Hill have no sunset date, which is indicative of properties that are set up under slum and blighted. These are not slum and blighted by any means anymore. So at some point, you need to convert that to be economic development with a 20-year sunset, or if it even should just be terminated. Now, that's been discussed by council.
Okay, and I'm going to speak as a council person. I think that's a matter of opinion, what slum and blighted is,
Okay.
clearly. I want to make sure that I understand, and again, I'm a normal citizen elected in this position. So TIF is meant to incentivize development and help shift the tax burden from residential to when we talk about these cities who have more of a industrial and where we're more residential based city. The point of these industrial parks is to help shift that and bring jobs and all the things that make our city work and function. I know that's oversimplifying it, but am I wrong in thinking that that is why we have TIF, right? I mean, that's how we got target distribution to come here, and that's how we have jobs and everything, and the development and growth around that area. Am I wrong in thinking that?
No, and
Okay.
and business component, business incentives are just a small piece of that. And if you look in our downtown TIF, we're using TIF funding for our Main Street reconstruction project and the streetscaping and Peter Melendi Park. If we didn't use TIF funds for that, we would have to use some other form of funding, GO bonds, which are repaid by property taxes. So it's not just, I don't look at TIF as just a business incentive, it does play into it. But we can use TIF funds for all sorts of other infrastructure, quality of life projects, things like that as well.
But in my simple mind, it's helping to, when we're talking about our budget, it's helping to push some of the burden from us homeowners paying property taxes, and it's bringing in other income so that we're not, like as you just said, helping to cover the costs of maintaining our downtown area as it needs to be updated and, maintained, correct?
Yep.
Okay, I just want to make sure that, I know I oversimplified it, but I am not a financial guru, so that helps me. I want to make sure, and I feel like the majority of citizens probably aren't financial gurus, so I want to make sure I bring that up. Yes, Councilman.
Maybe I
yes.
could just add to that a little bit. So you're absolutely right, Councilman Dunn, is, when you have the TIF in the downtown area, for instance, or the College Hill or some of those areas, the mechanism that we use is the TIF district to do some of those infrastructure projects, and whether it's the streetscaping or the reconstruction of the roadway or the water mains or the sewer lines, those are all paid in those districts with TIF, which actually helps out in other areas of town. Because if you decided that, hey, we don't have a TIF district anymore and we're actually going to go ahead and reconstruct roads, now that's taking away from local option sales tax and road use tax that could be used in other parts of the community that don't have TIF districts, or the sewer fund that wouldn't have a TIF district. So it's taking away from projects in those other areas as well. So.
Thank you. Yes, Councilman Harding.
So, I guess if we're talking about, I don't think it's really logical to police, the difference in building valuation and tear down and how long you're getting into some pretty sticky ordinances to create or whatever we would have to create to do that. But is there, how much difference, what are we talking about money wise? How much difference in tax valuation and how many buildings and how many instances have we seen this happen? Is this a concern that we generally should be aware of, or is it more of like just kind of a,
From staff's perspective, I'm not too worried about it. There are projects downtown that the building has been there and we've included in that valuation. Now, there might be one or two examples where they might have torn a building down. I don't know if they were using it to exploit it or if they bought the property, tore it down, and then worked on plans and then came to the city the following year and said, here's what we want to do. Can we enter into an agreement? So, looking at one example, I believe, is the Arabella at First Street here. There was, I think, 2 buildings on that property, and that valuation was included in the agreement. So, say that had a valuation of $100,000, and now the building's at $2.1 million. Well, that developer's only getting the increase of $2 million because there was buildings on that property at the time. So, we've seen them both ways, but not enough to where I think staff is concerned about that being exploited.
Okay, thanks.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Councilman Ganfield.
I think I should have some pretty easy questions here for you. Going back to, it looks like slide page 27 on the Pinnacle Prairie. The TIF district there does expire in 2026, correct? It was established in 2006, so I presume that's the 20-year expiration. My real question is just the contiguous nature of a TIF. Is this just a map error where the city property that used to be Cedar Heights Drive is disconnected, or is that actually connected in the lower right there?
Yeah, so when it was created, that was Cedar Heights Drive, so the legal description followed that roadway. So when they moved the road, it kind of shifted the boundary.
And the reason I'm asking is my understanding of TIF has to be contiguous. Are they in fact contiguous because it's city-owned property that divided that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I just want to make that clarification there. I think, as we're looking towards even this expiration 2026, I think the council does have some discussion to have around what we want to do with diverting some of those expired incremental funds. I do think we enjoy a pretty low tax rate, but I would like to see a discussion on that. But that's incumbent upon us to have that discussion. As Ron has said, this is the direction we have now, is that we set this aside for economic development. And so that's what we're doing today, and we can talk about changing that as we desire as a council. But for tonight's purposes, I appreciate your presentation.
Right. Yeah, as Mr. Gaines said, after 2016, when the area where Target came offline, that was a council policy. At the time, the council agreed that they would set that city portion that was now released off to the side. And just I mentioned this in the presentation back in November, just on TIF in general, is that we're not getting a constant flow of cash into a TIF fund. It's a reimbursement program is what it is. So we have to show the county that we have projects that are eligible, and the county then gives us the money to pay that. So the notion that we may have like millions of dollars sitting in like a TIF fund that's not the case.
So for instance, regarding the downtown and the streetscape, we've spent that money. Now we need to go back and prove it and get it back. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right, Councilman Cruz. I'm sorry.
A couple points made after I spoke. The state code defines slum and blighted to a very lengthy degree, so it's not a subjective decision on what's considered slum and blighted. And based on that definition, I don't see anything in the downtown area that would qualify that as a slum and blighted area any longer. So by virtue of that, I think that should be updated. That can be another discussion, but College Hill would be a similar thing. I mean, some of that is definitely older, excuse me, but we could look at that. To Mr. Harding's
Hey, man.
Councilman,
Maybe one day.
Councilman Harding.
Senator Harding.
Depends on where I'm talking, right?
Yeah.
The valuation could be $1 million building we tear down and put $100 million. I mean, it can be a significant number that changes in the valuation from a building to dirt and then back up. But just want to make that point, Senator. So, get to a new question. The $1.50 per square foot, I'll just call it the older industrial park. You stated and showed here that that's the cost to put it into play as developed lots, right?
Yes.
Okay. The newer industrial park, you've updated that to be $1.84, is what you're saying here? I mean, it says 172 on our.
Yeah. So after, I
$1.84.
apologize for that. What I had forgot to include was the price that we paid for the water rights.
Yeah,
So
that's
that
fair.
kind of
I'm
that
just
bumped it up.
clarifying this.
Mhm.
Then you mentioned on some properties that were sold, you had some examples here, CrossFit Kilo and gymnastics and so on. You sold at fair market value. What was the?
Well, the $1.50 is what the $1.50.
Okay, so that wasn't fair market value. That was an established cost put into the property. So that's a big difference in my mind. We need to do, if we're going to have a city policy to sell lots out of any of our industrial parks, we need to have a valuation that's current to the time of the property being sold, not a cost basis number from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever, because the city's losing money. It makes a significant difference in what it's worth. And that extra money then can be rolled back into the TIF or into the TIF or the program or industrial park to continue developing it, because we're losing money as a city, because who buys a house at $100,000, holds it for 10 years, and then sells it at $100,000? You just don't do that. You go at the new valuation of the property. So if we're selling land under the terms of our policy here for different entities based on what you described here in this presentation, we have to have an appraised valuation of the commercial net worth of that property, in my mind, not the cost you put into it to develop it.
All right, thank you. Anyone else have any other comments regarding this presentation?
I have a question.
Yes.
So if we sell, it seems like we've only sold 2 lots. Do those have to be approved by council? I wasn't on council when they were done, so I'm just curious.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. They were, both the land sales were approved by city council.
And then in the presentation or the memo or the information, do you guys put on there, do we get an appraisal, or how does that work?
No, we did not do an appraisal on that. Again, with the sale of those 2 lots, we sold it at the $1.50 per square foot.
Do we know if it was by chance above appraisal, below, or?
We didn't do an appraisal at the time,
So
so
we
I wouldn't know.
Yes, Councilman Schultz.
Shane, as part of the incentive for businesses, industries to come to the industrial park, having that $1.50 be the cost? Or if it was $1.75, do you think they'd go, you know what, we can find another place?
So I don't think so. The short answer is I don't think that matters. So when we work with businesses and we do land donations in accordance with a development agreement, so they're not buying it at that price, but that number is included in our minimum valuation. So, if they acquire 10 acres and it jumps from 65 to 80,000, then it'd be an extra 150,000 would be on the valuation, which on a $10 million project is probably not much.
Yeah.
Shane, you've also checked with other communities that value theirs as well. So could you maybe share some of those?
Yeah, I just know, for one other example, our neighbor to the east, Waterloo, I believe they, in one of their newer industrial parks, it's a certified site too by the state. I think they value that property at 75,000 an acre as well. So fairly close to, I think, what we're looking at here.
We're at 65,000.
Yes. They acquired that property more recently, though, and again, with us looking at that 200 acres and maybe putting that valuation at 80,000, I think that's probably a little bit more comparable then to Waterloo, what they're valuing their property at.
Okay.
Yes, Councilman Cruz.
So I think the overriding point of having an industrial park TIF for promotion incentive is to bring in businesses that have employees that buy properties and spend their money in our community. If we sell off land at a cheaper value than they could buy it outside the TIF, we would potentially use up our land for non-employee generating businesses. So it kind of goes against what I think the TIF is ultimately designed for. And I think if we sell anything, it should be lots that maybe are unusually shaped for projects that are not bringing in employees and get the full fair value. Otherwise, we're competing against private people selling land that could be developed by a developer.
Yes, Councilman Harding.
I can see your point, but the council still has to agree to sell it. So it still comes to us to
Exactly.
to say yes or no, we don't want to sell. And so I would say it's on the rather than try to manage it through amending a policy, just allow the future councils to do their due diligence and make sure that they want to sell that land.
Understood, but if a project's coming forward, as we had in the past, is looking at $1.50 when we know that the going rate's $1.84 to find replacement value, because when you have a appraisal on something, you got market value, you got replacement, and so on. There's three valuations. $1.84 should be the valuation in anything in any of our industrial parks, because that's what it costs.
What if the assessment comes in lower? Then we're going to have to sell it lower.
It won't.
Well.
Inflation is, so. But then what you're saying is that when we have a project, we can amend that right in front of us to say instead of $1.50, we want $1.84. How will that look, Mr. Gaines, if we have something coming forward? You're telling a developer that we value the old one at $1.50, but we know $1.84 is what the number is. Would they be agreeable?
You're absolutely right. We want to know what that dollar figure is going into it, and we also want to know what the council's policy is looking at that. If we're not going to look at accessory uses within the park, then that's something that we need to know. Is it strictly going to be industrial uses, or are there going to be additional accessory uses that we'd want to use as well? And I think we want to be careful on trying to say, hey, are we losing money on this, or do we have a fair market value for what the sale of this would be? Because isn't the point to still try to get businesses in there and use that lower dollar figure, or the $1.50 or the $1.85, to use that as an incentive to attract and retain businesses?
It certainly is, Mr. Gaines, but like I said a little bit ago, if there is a citizen that has some land that wants to sell at fair market value, top dollar is always what a person selling wants to get, and then they're competing against $1.50, then they're at a disadvantage to put in some sort of project that fits. And I don't think the city should be competing against private citizens and selling their land. We should be at the market rate for that, because it's
I
not
think
fair.
the other thing that we have to make sure when we're valuing that land, we can't just flip-flop and say, okay, as we're giving it away, it's $1.50, but as we're selling it, it's $1.84. You know, it's got to be a consistent dollar figure that's out there. So one of the challenges that Shane has when he goes up against other companies, whether they're in Iowa or in the Midwest or nationwide, is what is that? What does that look to when he's sitting down across from the other tables competing with other communities? How do we attract those here? So we want to make sure that we're pricing those correctly.
But if we are giving away the land, there's no discussion of the square footage value.
Well, it still comes into play because that dollar figure is still what's valued in the minimum assessment agreement.
Eventually, that's what's the taxes are going to be based on is that valuation.
Is the minimum valuation correct?
But we had some comments here that said, you know, 150,000 on a $10 million project's not that much, but 150,000 can buy quite a bit in most people's checkbooks. So little dollars add up on every single project we ever do. You don't want to diminish it and say, well, 150,000 is no big deal. It's always a big deal because that buys a few vehicles for people, multiple vehicles for people. It can buy a small house, average house, depending where. It's not a small dollar amount.
Right, I just clarify, that's not what I was saying. I
Well-
was using it in reference to Mr. Schultz's question about
Right.
whether or not a business would still be interested in the city if we used $1.50 or $1.80 per square foot. And I said, in those terms, probably
Sure.
not.
Well, then, if
wanted to clarify.
somebody's building a $10 million building, to them, it's not going to make that much difference. But to our budget, every $100,000 adds up. And if we diminish that once a week for a year, it's a lot of money.
Okay, can I say something real quick? This is the way I look at it, and again, I know I oversimplify it, but we are in a state that is not growing by population. We are shrinking. We have more people leaving, dying, or retiring than we have coming into our state. We live on a major corridor, Highway 20. We have communities up and down from the west to the east trying to compete and get businesses to come to their communities and set up shops so they can have jobs and the tax incentives, all the things that go with that. I feel like we're talking in circles. First of all, we've had this conversation in November, and I'm thankful that I appreciate Mr. Graham's time. But the point is that this is set up to help Cedar Falls get businesses to come here. And I don't get it because we talk about the budget and we wanted 0% tax increase, but then we're doing stuff to make businesses not come here. We are micromanagers, and I worry about that. And I don't know why we think we're so big that we don't need to. It just blows my mind that we would think that we need to make this harder and less of a incentive for folks to consider Cedar Falls as their home. So I just have to say, I just it just blows my mind that we're having this conversation again. And we're creeping up on the end of our time. Any one last thought here? Okay, I appreciate your time, Mr. Graham, and we will adjourn, and I believe that Denny probably needs, 5 or 10 minutes to turn it around. So we'll be back about 7:08 or so.